Hey there everybody, I'm Rob and I have another recipe for you today. We're going to be cooking a steak sandwich and we're going to be turning a cheap cut of meat into something really tasty. The main ingredients for this recipe are going to be our beef, our spinach, our tomato, and our bread. The only spices we're going to be using for this recipe are salt and pepper. Other than that, we have what we need to cook with, which is going to be a baking sheet lined with foil with a rack on top and a frying pan. You could use just a frying pan for this recipe, but because I'm using a cheaper cut of beef here, the London broil, I'm going to be reverse searing it so that it'll end up nice and tender. Anyway, with all that said, let's get to cooking. Okay, the first thing you're going to want to do is unpack your beef and pat it dry with a paper towel. Then you're going to season it generously, and I mean generously, with salt and black pepper. And that's it, it's ready to cook, so throw it on your baking sheet lined with foil and a rack on top. Then throw it in the oven preheated to 275. Now there's no specific cook time for this recipe. Instead, we're going to be looking for an internal temp of around 95 degrees, give or take 5 degrees, and this is Fahrenheit. So while that's in the oven, you can go ahead and slice your tomatoes. Then you're going to want to season them lightly with salt. Trust me, this does make a difference and it is going to make your sandwich that much better. After that, slice your bread and your prep is pretty much done. The only other thing we gotta do is toast our bread, but we're gonna do that after we finish cooking our steak. Now back to our beef. I pulled mine out of the oven around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and this took me about 25 minutes to get there. The amount of time that it's going to take you to get your steak up to temp is going to depend on how thick your cut is. And if your steak is thinner than about an inch or an inch and a half, then I probably wouldn't even use this method at all. For a thinner steak, it's better to just sear it in a pan and it'll be fine. Then once you pull your steak out, it's going right into a pan with enough oil to cover the bottom that is preheated so that the oil is smoking hot. Here we're just getting a good sear on both sides and waiting for our steak to come up to temp. And for people that have heard that you can only cook steak once per side or else you'll somehow ruin it, yeah, that's a bunch of baloney. You can flip your steak as many times as you want until you're satisfied with that sear. And if your sear is going a little too fast and you're worried about burning your steak while your steak is coming up to temp, you can drop the heat to medium and wait for this steak to come up to temp there. Anyway, when your steak gets to an internal temp of about 120, give or take 5 degrees, that is the perfect medium rare temperature, and you're just gonna let it sit while we toast our bread. To toast your bread, you're going to want to first melt about a half tablespoon of butter in your pan, preheated on medium. Then just put your bread in and wait for it to get some nice color on it. You can use a few different types of rolls here and they'll all be pretty good. I used a brat roll for mine, but you can use French bread or ciabatta or a hoagie roll, whatever you think will be good. After you got your color on your bread, pull it out and it's finally time for assembly. First, chop your steak and admire how good it looks. And disclaimer, don't cut your steak as thick as I did here. These cuts are more camera cuts than anything, just so they look good for you guys. But you're going to want to chop yours pretty thin so that it's nice and tender and you can chew through it. Because if your cuts are too thick, you're going to just end up pulling all the steak out anytime you bite into it, and nobody wants that. After chopping your steak, it's time to lay down some condiments on your bread. My favorite is just a good layer of mayonnaise on both sides, but spicy mustard is also good here. Then lay down a good bed of spinach. And I've made this recipe a whole bunch of times and I'm telling you, it takes a lot of spinach to overpower this sandwich. After that, put on your salted tomatoes and your steak. The last thing to do is put the top on your sandwich and you are done. This recipe is super easy, it took about 45 minutes to make and it was super tasty. Anyway, that's all I got. Stick around if you want to see the recipe and the cost breakdown for this. Otherwise, see you next time.